Shabbat Shalom. This week's Torah portion is Chukat, and I'd like to focus on a story in the middle of the Torah portion that talks about the bringing forth the water from the rock. If you'll recall, we're talking here about Numbers chapter 20. The nation of Israel is very upset. They don't have water, and as we've seen in a previous situation, they immediately complain to Moses, "Where is the water?" Moses and Aaron go before God, and God gives them an instruction. What does God tell them to do? This is chapter 20, verse 8. "Take your staff and assemble the assembly together, you and Aaron your brother, and speak to the rock before their eyes, and it shall give forth its water. And you shall bring forth to them water out of the rock, so you shall give the congregation and their beasts drink." And then Moses, of course, continues, "And Moses took the staff from before the Eternal, as he commanded him. And Moses and Aaron assembled the congregation before the rock, and he said to them, 'Hear now, you rebels, will we bring forth water out of this rock?' And Moses lifted up his hand, and with his staff he smote the rock twice, and the water came out abundantly, and the congregation drank, and their beasts drank." Immediately following this, God is very angry at Moses, and he says to them, verse 12, "Because you did not believe me to sanctify me in the eyes of the children of Israel, therefore you shall not bring this assembly into the land which I have given them." It has bothered many commentators. What did Moses and Aaron do so bad, so wrong, that God's punishment to them was that neither of them, neither Moses nor Aaron, would be able to go into the land of Israel? A very classic commentator, and one of the most, I guess, commonly understood ways of looking at this, is that if we look carefully at the scripture, we will see that God says in verse 8, "Speak to the rock," and yet what Moses actually did in verse 11 is that he hit the rock. Now, at first glance, you might think that's a very petty situation. What does it matter if you speak to the rock, if you hit the rock? Is this such a terrible thing? And I would add to that question. Aaron is punished together with Moses in this situation, and we saw previously that Aaron had been involved in the sin of the golden calf. It's very complicated. I don't want to discuss that right now. But whatever his involvement was at that point, he clearly was involved, and yet he is not punished at all for his involvement in the golden calf, which on its face would be a far graver sin than this particular sin of actually, he didn't even hit the rock. He stood with Moses as Moses hit the rock. So if Moses hit but didn't speak, what was Aaron's problem? I think one of the things we need to pay attention to is exactly what stick are we talking about here. And if we notice in verse 9, God says, what Moses did, Moses took the staff from before the Eternal, from before God. Which staff was before God? And if we remember in last week's Torah portion, when we read about the rebellion of Korah and his gang, at the end of that whole thing, one of the things that happened was that all of these people all the leaders of the nation put their rods or their staffs up before God, and Aaron's staff bloomed and the others were burnt. And then as a result of that, Aaron's staff that has bloomed is placed before the Ark of the Covenant. So very possibly, I think a very logical interpretation, therefore, if you say the staff is taken from before God, the staff that is actually used in this case may well be Aaron's staff. The staff, therefore, we also have Moses and Aaron both using a staff previously throughout the period of time that they are in Egypt. And in that case, a staff is something that is used to begin a miracle. And in fact, the language in verse 11 here reminds us very much of the language that we saw whenever Moses and Aaron were performing or beginning the various plagues that took place in Egypt. And I'll just give you an example. Here in verse 11 it says, "And Moses lifted up his hand with his staff, and he smote the rock." And if we look at Exodus, when with the first plague, just as an example, the first plague of blood, we have in chapter 7, this is Exodus chapter 7, verse 20, and it says, and Moses and Aaron did as God commanded, and he lifted up his staff, and he hit the water. So this idea of lifting up a staff, hitting something, in this case it was hitting the Nile in order to bring forth blood. In the case of our Torah portion, he's hitting the rock in order to bring forth water. But clearly there's a parallel here. And I heard one commentator suggest something that was very interesting. He said the staff is actually associated with the performance of miracles. The performance of miracles in a very dramatic way. And we certainly saw this as Moses takes the staff throughout the period that they are in Egypt. All these plagues, almost all of them, if not all of them, are begun with some kind of lifting or hitting of a staff. The final miracle, of course, is the splitting of the Red Sea, and that also we have Moses lifting his staff and smiting it down on the water as it parts. Clearly then, what Moses is doing here is following that pattern. And if we combine this with the idea that the staff may well be Aaron's staff, which is the one that in itself has just miraculously bloomed, what Moses is actually doing, and Moses and Aaron together, in this sense of Moses and Aaron staying together, using Aaron's staff in a way that Moses and Aaron had used staffs previously, they are getting ready to perform a major miracle. A miracle in the grandiose sense. A miracle of lifting your hand and striking something, and then some kind of change, supernatural change is happening. But that's not what God wanted. God asked them to speak to the rock. He said, take your staff, gather the people, and speak to the rock before their eyes. What God is wanting Moses and Aaron to do here is not so much to perform a miracle, but to teach the children of Israel. He wants them to speak to the rock. He wants them to see that water will come forward, but not in this grandiose way with using the staff. But the staff in this case is a sign of leadership. They are going to stand before the children of Israel, and they will teach them. And indeed, when God is angry at them, what does he say? You didn't believe in me to sanctify me in the eyes of the children of Israel. You missed the opportunity to teach the children of Israel a lesson. Not by waving around or using a stick in a magical sort of way, but to teach, to speak. And perhaps we could connect this as well with what happens once the children of Israel enter the land of Israel. The period of the desert is over. They go from a nation totally dependent on miracles, on water in the desert and manna in the wilderness, to a time where they are going to have to fight a war. They're going to have to plant and harvest and prepare their own food. The leadership, therefore, that is required for them to enter the land of Israel is a completely sort of leadership. It is not the kind of leadership that is just about raising your hand, hitting something, and performing a great miracle. Here, once you enter into the land of Israel, we have to subdue the miracle. The miracle will still be there. Water will still come from a rock, perhaps, when we need it. But the emphasis will go from the grandiose to the teaching, to the speaking. And perhaps it is this test of leadership that Moses and Aaron failed. And perhaps because of this, God understood, not that they were bad people, but that they were the wrong leadership to take the children of Israel into the land of Israel, to take them into that next stage. They were absolutely the right leadership for performing grandiose miracles. They perhaps were not the right leadership for taking them in and teaching them because, as we see here, they were all too eager to strike the rock and produce a grandiose miracle, and they missed the opportunity to teach, to speak, and in that way, through teaching and through speaking, sanctify God's name. Shabbat Shalom from Samaria.